everybody. Pleased to see the blue skies. Can't believe it.
And it's good
welcome to this action that's organized by several organizations. The first speaker today will be Sofia Ilniak, who is speaking on behalf of CCFA, the Canadian-Cuban Friendship Association. Please give her a big welcome.
I'm very much.
Okay, so 65 years ago today, that Cuba defeated an invasion by the U.S. at the Bay of Pigs. Am I good? This was a very decisive moment. It was the first defeat of U.S. imperialism in Latin America. And today, that same struggle continues, but in a different format, right? We're not seeing bombs right now, but we're seeing the longest economic blockade in modern history, which is designed to strangle everyday life in Cuba. So why does Cuba matter so much? It matters because it's not really an exception. It's an example. What's done to Cuba is what empire does when a country decides to choose sovereignty over submission. They're called sanctions, but when a country is denied fuel, when it's denied medicine, and when it's denied the ability to trade with other countries, that's not just some sort of policy, that's siege. A couple of weeks ago, a number of us here were in front of the US consulate and for our regular monthly rally, and we were met with counter-protesters. And they had very hostile language for us. They were saying things like, Trump finished the job. It's hard to imagine how they got to this position, but it's not really about them, it's what they represent. And that's the interests of empire that requires poverty and exploitation for the benefit of the few. And these counter-protesters looked quite honestly backwards when we, finished our rally, packed up and walked away, and they were still shouting into the wind. So, who are we? Why are we on this corner today? We're a number of organizations. I'm with the Canadian-Cuban Friendship Association. We have a bunch of different goals, different histories, but we're united as a part of a global movement for Cuba. As Fidel called it, this is a movement of the humble, by the humble, and for the humble. And whether you've been organizing for decades or if you just happen to be passing by right now, this struggle belongs to you too. Because our hardship here in Canada, poverty, unaffordability, is tied to this global situation that's created by the US. Cuba needs us, right? We're doing a lot of charity work for Cuba right now, but even more than that, I think we need Cuba, or the world needs Cuba. It's been standing up to the US this entire time, and it's showing us that actually this is totally possible, and maybe we should consider doing the same. So what do we all do here, and what can you do? We're demanding an end to the blockade on Cuba. And you can do this today if you go speak with your MP, for example. We've got a petition going around. If you haven't signed it yet, please do so. There's a QR code. And we're refusing disinformation. So we're talking to everyday Canadians on the street today. And yeah, if you're passing by, please grab a flyer, sign the petition, sign up with us, and bring in a friend next time. So as a victory that declared that another world is possible. They've tried to isolate Cuba, they've tried to strangle Cuba, but Cuba's still standing. And today, we're standing with Cuba. Viva Cuba! Viva! Viva Fidel! Viva!
Next speaker in 10 minutes. End of May, we're going to celebrate International Workers' Days at Steel Workers Hall. 7 p.m. May 2nd. For all of those of you that want to celebrate the Workers' Day, International Workers' Day, 7 p.m. May 2nd, Steelworkers Hall.
Is the final day of the parliamentary petition. If you haven't signed the petition yet, it's very important. We set out to get 10,000 signatures. We've already got over 16,000 signatures, but we want as many as we can. So if you haven't signed yet, there's a QR code on our flyers. You just scan that code and you'll go directly to the parliamentary petition site and you can sign the petition. And if you're talking to others, or you can speak to others later on this afternoon and this evening, get them to sign as well. But today is the final day, so please make sure that we get every possible signature we can today. Thank you very much. Next speaker, his name is Remy Liard, and he's speaking on behalf of the Toronto Association for Peace and Solidarity. Please give him a big welcome.
Hi everyone. So one of the core organizing principles of the Toronto Association for Peace and Solidarity is a demand for the respect for sovereignty and the territorial integrity of states. And in practice, this means we oppose any and all unjust unilateral acts of economic coercion, which, by their very nature and intent, undermines the free development of free peoples. Sovereign equality under the UN Charter means that all member states, regardless of size, wealth, or power, possess equal legal rights and standing in international law. It dictates that states are juridically equal and must respect each other's territorial integrity and political independence, and that they have the right to choose their own path of development without external interference. So we need to hold this framework in mind with all its imperfections and complications, while at the same time addressing the concrete situation on the ground, where the United States has imposed a unilateral economic, commercial, and financial blockade on the people of Cuba for more than 60 years. Since 1962, Canada's largest trading partner, the United States, has sanctioned and implemented an economic blockade against the Cuban people in flagrant violation of international law, and has intentionally set out to undermine the self-determination and human rights of the Cuban people. Shame! Shame! In a 1960 memorandum, Lester D. Mallory, then U.S. Assistant Secretary of State, encouraged the implementation of an embargo on Cuba in order to, and I quote, weaken the economic life of Cuba, to bring about hunger, desperation, and overthrow of the government. To underscore this final point, the intent is to overthrow the government and to have a regime change. And since the 1960s, little has changed. The intention of the blockade has been and remains regime change. And in 2023, an international tribunal against the blockade of Cuba took place in Brussels, placing testimony from dozens of experts before a European jury. Though symbolic and non-binding, these proceedings were published in a 2024 report entitled Denunciation of a Crime. After consideration of the evidence presented, the judges drew the following conclusions. No blockade has been as comprehensive, long-lasting, and brutal against a people as the one the United States has maintained against Cuba. The blockade has resulted directly and indirectly in the loss of numerous human lives. The U.S. has decided to maintain this blockade until the Cuban people decide to bow. The U.S. are determined to maintain measures that are calculated to bring about, in the long term, the physical destruction, at least in part, of the Cuban people. And such an attitude could amount to a crime of genocide. Sure. What has become the longest running blockade in modern history has succeeded to various degrees in achieving the first three of its aims: to weaken the economic life of Cuba, to bring about hunger, and at times to bring about desperation. But it's failed in its primary aim, which is the overthrow of its government. It's important to highlight that the entire international community has seen through the United States' baseless justifications for implementing this economic war against Cuba, which has been overwhelmingly condemned at the United Nations for 33 consecutive years. In the last few months, the US regime has intensified its attacks on Cuba, imposing a total blockade on fuel supplies to the island, and Cuba finds itself in the midst of a humanitarian catastrophe. The US now openly floats the idea of a military assault on Cuba. Over 75% of the country's oil imports have vanished, and more it's become difficult to bring in any supplies and energy. Hospitals are running on generators that are now running out of fuel, and power blackouts are lasting up to 16 hours a day. It's important that we understand this escalatory action against Cuba, which is connected to the January 3rd military attack on Venezuela and the kidnapping of the country's president, Maduro, as an attack on the sovereignty of countries throughout the world. And this is particularly true for countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. And it's also an attack on Canadian people and our sovereignty as well. How so? First, hundreds of thousands of Canadians have family members in Cuba. And more than this, the US imposed embargo and its sanctions on countries the world over restricts the horizon of Canadian foreign policy by limiting friendly bilateral relations and trade against the will and the interests of the Canadian people as well. To defend Cuba's right to self-determination, we are also fighting for our own sovereignty then, by defending the right of Canadians to travel, trade, and engage freely. It's a defense of international law against the rule of might makes right. Canada is a signatory to the UN Charter, and if it hopes to bolster its framework and its legal fabric, its commitment must not be purely rhetorical. Canada must firmly oppose the US embargo on Cuba and Trump's economic genocide. Canada must deepen economic ties, expand trade, and increase material assistance to Cuba. And Canada must also ship oil to Cuba immediately. We need to build a movement with a broad space of unity that will foment the political will to do this. And these are the material and the concrete actions that can be put flesh on the bare bones of international law and thereby give it life. And these are the material and concrete actions that Cuba needs in this hour of need. Thank you.
Speaker, and I'm very pleased to introduce Kael. I'm fucking up his last name, my apologies. But he's speaking on behalf of the Juan Gilberto Gomez Association of Cubans resident here in Toronto. Please give him a very big welcome.
Hello guys. Well, today is the 65th anniversary of the victory of the Cubans defending their homeland, their country against the mercenary invasion of Bay of Pigs is how it is internationally known. We know it better as the victory of Playa Girón, or Girón Beach. This was 65 years ago. Today we are being threatened with invasion, with aggression, military aggression, 3 or 4 times already by Donald Trump. And we are seeing that how he has been going into the aggression of Venezuela, of Iran, that is not going very well for him, and he's threatening Cuba. One of the problems might be that because of this frustration of not having a good result in Iran, he might want to invade or attack Cuba to get something that can sound like a victory. But the Cubans are ready to defend. Shame on that. But the Cubans are ready to defend their homeland. There is something that the imperialists cannot understand, which is the defense of sovereignties beyond even the political systems. It is deeper than the political system. And defending the sovereignty of Cuba will be something that will happen if aggression happens. And they will be standing on a wasp nest if they dare to do so. So about the blockade, I wanted to share with you a couple of ideas. That first, it's not an embargo. An embargo would be a bilateral thing. This is something that chases down Cuba's transactions and relations all around the world. They threaten any banks, any countries, any enterprises, even individuals that do any trade with Cuba. They have fined banks for billions of dollars when they have dared to do investment or any transaction with Cuban enterprises or state-owned enterprises. So this blockade, it's an economic war, and it's been for very long. It's the longest blockade of the history of humanity, like economic blockade. And I want to tell you, the last thing I want to share with you is that this is becoming worse because actually the United States are losing leverage in the world. They are losing leverage in front of China, and they are scared to death that their empire is going down. So everything is communicated, everything is linked in this. The aggression on Iran is actually not just for Iran. They don't care anything about women's rights or the rights of workers or the human rights of anyone, because they support Saudi Arabia, which is an absolute monarchy that beheads women for witchery. Shame on that. And they support these absolute monarchies in the Gulf that are anything but democracies. So they do not support democracy, they do not support human rights, and everything about Iran is their oil, is their gas, is their hydrocarbons, is actually then to act on that so they can prevent China to get these resources because they want to stop China's development. So we have to see this, and the case of Cuba is because Cuba is not a threat against anyone. Cuba doesn't export bombs or aggression. Cuba exports doctors, vaccines, medications. And the problem with Cuba, the only real threat that Cuba is the example of sovereignty. And this is mostly with Latin America, because the United States have been looting the raw materials of Latin America for decades. They have been enforcing military dictatorships all around, fascist military dictatorships that have killed or disappeared millions of people in Latin America. And Cuba is a standing example that they cannot withstand, that they really can't stand that. So they want to take that out because Latin America is what they consider to be their backyard, and that's why they want to eliminate Cuba. And we have to defend that. Actually, as we are defending also Canadian sovereignty, since they want to turn Canada into their 51st or 52nd state. That's what they want to do with Canada. And I don't think Canadians want to lose the conditions of not being from the United States. Thank you very much.
In support of Cuba on this Day of Action for Cuba. We're here. I'm part of the Latin American Caribbean Solidarity Network, and we're here to stand for Cuba and against the blockade and the imperialist entity that is looking to suffocate Cuba and is actively killing kids, men and women, and we are here to say shame. Shame! Thank you everybody for coming out. We have a lot of flyers here. We're also, if you'd like to donate via cash or e-transfer to the Canadian Network on Cuba, we're working on sending aid in not barrels, but a container. So if you also would like to donate towards that as well, we're doing what we can to help the people of Cuba. Viva Cuba! Viva!
Very pleased to call up Dave McKee. Dave McKee is the editor of People's Voice, but he will be speaking today on behalf of the Communist Party of Canada. Dave, give it up, please, for Dave.
Everybody, it's lovely to see so many people standing out here on this brusque spring day in solidarity with the people of Cuba. Badly needed solidarity. The Communist Party, I'm just going to read a statement that the Communist Party executive we issued for this day. The Communist Party extends a salute to the actions taking place in over a dozen cities across the country today. Called by the Canadian Network on Cuba and La Table de Concertation de Solidarité Québec-Cuba, this cross-Canada mobilization carries a unified demand. The Canadian government must end its shameful silence and immediately send oil to Cuba. Yeah. This day of action represents the will of the majority across the country. According to a recent Nanos research poll, a majority of Canadian people want Ottawa to tell the United States to end its criminal energy blockade, regardless of the consequences for U.S.-Canada relations. That's an excellent, excellent stat. While the Prime Minister postures about sovereignty and territorial integrity in Davos, his government has offered only token aid, smaller than what Washington itself has provided. Shame. And Ottawa has handed this money to NGOs rather than the sovereign Cuban government. Shame. The deafening silence from Ottawa regarding Trump's oil blockade is a surrender of Canada's own interests at a time when this country's sovereignty is challenged by U.S. expansionism. Defending Cuba's right to self-determination is the most direct defense of our own. This silence from Ottawa is particularly shameful as the violations of international law are escalating. This week, the Pentagon is reportedly laying the groundwork for a potential military intervention in Cuba. Shame! Donald Trump has openly declared, "I do believe I will be having the honor of taking Cuba. Whether I free it, I take it. I can do anything I want with it." This is dangerous and shameful. He must be stopped. In the face of these explicit threats, the Canadian government has issued travel warnings and effectively suspended Canadian flights. These are actions that only deepen the Cuban people's isolation and economic pain. By refusing to condemn this illegal blockade or challenge this so-called Don Roe doctrine, Canada is greenlighting this imperialist aggression. The U.S. determination to overthrow the Cuban government stems from the threat of a good example. Cuba's socialist revolution proved that working people could kick out U.S. monopolies, reclaim its land and resources, and build a society where life expectancy rivals that of advanced capitalist countries, all while under a brutal siege. Cuba's ability to provide free healthcare and education exposes the lie that ruthless capitalist exploitation is necessary for human development. It is for this crime of dignity that Cuba is being starved and threatened. And that is why solidarity with Cuba is a global class imperative. The Communist Party of Canada calls on all defenders of sovereignty to join this fight and demand Canada send oil to Cuba. Now, let Cuba live!
We're going to wrap up a little bit early, but I want to thank you on behalf of CCFA and the other sponsoring organizations for coming out today. There's more materials on the literature table, but we're going to start closing up now, so if you haven't got anything yet, come by. Remember to sign that petition if you haven't signed it already. And thank you very much on behalf not only of the sponsoring organizations, but of the people of Cuba, revolutionary Cuba. Cuba will survive, Cuba will live, Cuba will win. Viva Cuba! Thank you very much.
Every last Sunday of the month, 1 p.m. This month is on next Sunday, which is the 26th. So every last Sunday of the month, against the blockade in front of the U.S. consulate. May 2nd, International Workers' Day at Steelworkers Hall, 7 p.m. We're going to be celebrating July 26th on July 25th. So we're going to wait for the 26th. That's going to be a Steelworkers too on July 25th. And we're going to do the same thing we did last year. We're going to roast the pork. So for those that came out last year and tasted our real delicious pork, we're going to have it again, Cuban style, July 25th at Steelworkers, 5 p.m. So thank you for coming, and we'll see you next time. Bye.